This episode is brought to you by Living Proof Church, a non-denominational, spirit-filled church in Araby, Louisiana. Services are held Sundays at 10 a.m. and live streamed on YouTube. Visit us at livingproof-church.com to plan your visit.
You are listening to Commission 6-8.
It is Thursday, January 8th in the greatest country on earth. I am your host, Randy Millette, and this is Commission 6-8. Today, we are talking about Venezuela, Maduro's capture, and the Monroe Doctrine. So let's go. All right, guys, welcome back, and thank you for being here. I hope that you all had a wonderful Christmas and a happy New Year. I know for myself and my family, we had a great Christmas. We ate good food. We got to spend time with family and friends. My kids got way too many presents. But we have started a new year, so welcome to 2026, and there is so much going on. In fact, there's so much going on that I had a hard time deciding what this episode was going to be about. Of course, we have Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota and former vice presidential candidate, under fire for the huge Somali corruption scandal that unfolded in Minnesota. It looks like Somalis in the state were getting government funds and running daycares that didn't exist or didn't have any children. It was all a front. Most of this money was sent back to Somalia. A lot of it was used to fund terrorism and terrorist groups. So that story is still unfolding, and a huge shout out to Nick Shirley, who broke that story, an independent journalist. You know, the times have really changed, and more independent journalists are doing the work that the mainstream media used to be relied upon to do. But like I covered in one of my last episodes, the one I did with Daniel Kwok on immigration, we talked about how the mainstream media has really lost America's trust. So now we see the rise of independent journalism, and more people are turning to podcasts and X and YouTube and independent journalists to get their news because they've completely lost faith in MSNBC and CNN and Fox News even. And with that come pros and cons. The pros being that independent journalism has provided a check and balance against the media and fear of state-run media or media being influenced by whoever's in power. The con being that anyone with a microphone and a computer has a voice, and it's caused a lot of confusion and it's caused a lot of division within both parties. But nevertheless, the quest for truth continues. And if you are here and you are listening to me, that means that I have gained your trust. And for that, I sincerely thank you. And I ask you to please share the show. Send it to a friend. Send it to some people you know. Post it on social media. Help us grow. Because here at Commission 6-8, we are dedicated to bringing you the truth, bringing you insight, bringing you fresh perspectives, keeping it biblically based, and above all, trying to keep you informed. So, let's talk about Venezuela. I'm sure, like everyone else, you have already heard that on January 3rd, 2026, the United States military forces conducted a daring overnight raid in Caracas, Venezuela, capturing President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. The operation, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve, involved approximately 200 U.S. Special Operations troops, primarily Delta Force, supported by airstrikes on Venezuelan air defenses and infrastructure. Now, I have to admit to you guys that I actually missed this when it happened. I'm somebody that consumes news almost constantly, and whenever things break like this, I'm usually the first to find out. In fact, we have a group text with guys I work with, and they call it the Millette Gazette, because I'm constantly sharing news with guys that I work with in the group text as it breaks, because I'm the first to the punch, I'm the first to find out. But in this case, on January 3rd, it was a Saturday, I had just gotten off of work, I was trying to get ahead of the game, and my wife and I were taking down the Christmas tree. Meanwhile, your president, President Trump, was conducting a regime change. Nevertheless, we all know now, and I want to talk about the legality of the operation, why it took place, and the history of Venezuela and the implications that it's going to have on geopolitics. Let's listen to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's remarks on the overnight raid in Venezuela.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Finally, a commander-in-chief the world respects and the American people deserve. And as the president said, words can barely capture the bravery and the power and the precision of this historic operation. A massive joint military and law enforcement raid flawlessly executed by the greatest Americans our country has to offer. American warriors are second to none, the best in the world and the best of our country. What all of us witnessed last night was sheer guts and grit, gallantry, and glory of the American warrior. I'm simply humbled by such men. And I tip my hat to our chairman, Dan Raisin Kane, and all those Americans who stood watch last night. Our warriors are the elite of America. And again, President Trump has your back. No other country on planet Earth, and it's not even close, could pull this kind of operation off. And no other president has ever shown this kind of leadership, courage, and resolve. The most powerful combination the world has ever seen. As the president said, our adversaries remain on notice. America can project our will anywhere, anytime. The coordination, the stealth, the lethality, the precision, the very long arm of American justice, all on full display in the middle of the night. Nicolás Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around, and he found out. President Trump is deadly serious about stopping the flow of gangs and violence to our country. Deadly serious about stopping the flow of drugs and poison to our people. Deadly serious about getting back the oil that was stolen from us. And deadly serious about reestablishing American deterrence and dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This is about the safety, security, freedom, and prosperity of the American people. This is America first. This is peace through strength. And the United States War Department is proud to help deliver it. Welcome to 2026. And under President Trump, America is back.
Now, a speech like that can have one of only two possible reactions. Either it fills you up with so much patriotism that you go clean all your rifles while listening to Toby Keith, or it makes you dye your hair purple and go shout at the sky and look for a safe place. But President Trump is a magician, and for his next trick, he's going to make Democrats defend a dictator. Listen to the esteemed Rachel Maddow.
In your heart of hearts, when you think about what the United States just did, I think there are very few Americans right now who have any idea why the United States did this.
Well, Rachel, since you asked, Maduro had faced a long-standing U.S. indictment since 2020 on charges of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and flooding the U.S. with cocaine via the Cartel of the Suns and related weapons offenses. In 2020, President Trump placed a $15 million bounty on Maduro's head for his capture. Under the Biden administration, that was raised to $25 million. And then in August of 2025, the second Trump administration, he increased the bounty to $50 million. But Rachel Maddow, who claims to speak for all Americans, doesn't understand why President Trump did this. And we wonder why America has lost faith in the mainstream media. Now, the capture of Maduro has drawn widespread condemnation as a violation of international law from places like Russia and China, who demand Maduro's release, and even some U.S. allies criticized it at the UN Security Council. Now, let's ask ourselves this question. Why would China and Russia have a problem with the arrest of a dictator in Venezuela? Well, this is obviously a huge geopolitical setback for both Russia and China, who have long been key allies and backers of the Maduro regime. Since the early 2000s, China has been Venezuela's largest creditor and major investor, pouring over $60 billion in loans and infrastructure projects, often secured by oil shipments. Maduro's ouster disrupts this debt diplomacy, putting billions at risk and potentially interrupting supplies of up to 1 million barrels per day of heavy crude oil, which accounts for about 4% of China's imports. In fact, Maduro hosted a Chinese delegation just hours before his capture, underscoring Beijing's close ties with Venezuela. Here's a clip summarizing the international reaction to the operation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ike. As you can imagine, so many leaders of so many countries are following events quite closely and watching what is going on in Venezuela. And reaction has been flooding in. Strong condemnation, as you said, from Russia, which has been one of Nicolás Maduro's longtime ally. The Russian Foreign Ministry saying that the U.S. has committed an act of armed aggression against Venezuela, which, quote, causes deep concern and condemnation. The Russian ministry also adding that Caracas must be allowed to determine its own destiny without any destructive military intervention from the outside. So strong words. But as you said, from China as well, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says that they're deeply shocked and strongly condemn the U.S.'s, quote, blatant use of force against a sovereign state in its attack on its president, urging the U.S. to abide by international law as well, Ike.
Now, like most things in life, for our foreign adversaries, this comes down to money. It comes down to resources. It comes down to oil. China is definitely feeling the squeeze, being so heavily reliant on Venezuelan oil, and so is Russia. With the isolation of Venezuela and then the potential isolation of Iran, I predict that this could actually bring an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, because with no other outlets of oil, Russia is going to be isolated, and they're going to have to tap into NATO European oil, which means they're going to have to end this years-long, ridiculous war in Ukraine, which really, if we look at it, has been President Trump's objective since day one. But as far as the United States is concerned, the actions in Venezuela can best be understood by looking at the history of the Monroe Doctrine. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Monroe Doctrine, how it originated, what it is, and how it applies today.
You are listening to Commission 6-8.
Today's sponsor is freespoke.com. Freespoke.com is a search engine web browser that you need to be using, like today, right? We know that Google and Meta, big tech, they've all admitted to censoring political speech. And we know that they collect and sell your data. At Freespoke, they give you both sides to every story. They give you all the information. They give you political perspectives, and they label media bias left, right, or middle, so you know the information that you're consuming. When we do research for these shows, my producer and I exclusively use freespoke.com. Now, you can download the app and start browsing today for free. But if you want an ad-free experience, subscribe and give them promo code COM68. That's promo code COM, C-O-M, 68. That will give you 35% off a yearly subscription. So make the switch today, use freespoke.com, and let's hold big tech accountable. That's freespoke.com. Think for yourself.
You are listening to Commission 6-8.
The Monroe Doctrine is a foundational U.S. foreign policy principle articulated by President James Monroe in his annual message to Congress on December 2nd, 1823. It declared that the Western Hemisphere was no longer open to European colonization or interference, and that any attempts by European powers to extend their political systems to the Americas would be viewed as hostile acts toward the United States. The doctrine aimed to protect the newly independent Latin American nations from reconquest while also asserting U.S. predominance in the region. In 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was drafted by Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. It responded to concerns over European powers potentially recolonizing newly independent Latin American nations following the revolutions against Spain and Portugal, and to Russian territorial claims of the Pacific Northwest. Now, Britain had proposed a joint declaration with the U.S. to oppose such interference, but Adams convinced Monroe to issue a unilateral U.S. statement to avoid entangling alliances. Now, after the issue of the Monroe Doctrine, there was little done to enforce it because the United States was a very young nation and it was fairly weak militarily. However, the first attempt to enforce Monroe Doctrine happened in 1895 in the country of, you guessed it, Venezuela. The Venezuelan boundary dispute officially began in 1841 when the Venezuelan government protested alleged British encroachment on Venezuelan territory. In 1814, Great Britain had acquired British Guiana by treaty with the Netherlands. Because the treaty did not define a western boundary, the British commissioned Robert Schomburgk, a surveyor naturalist, to delineate that boundary. His 1835 survey resulted in what became known as the Schomburgk Line, a boundary that effectively claimed an additional 30,000 square miles for Guyana. In 1841, Venezuela disputed the British delineation, claiming territorial delineations established at the time of their independence from Spain. Venezuela claimed its borders extended as far east as the Essequibo River, an effective claim on 2/3 of British Guiana's territory. But when gold was discovered in the disputed territory, Great Britain sought to further extend its reach, claiming an additional 33,000 square miles west of the Schomburgk Line, an area where gold had been discovered. In 1876, Venezuela protested and appealed to the United States for assistance, citing the Monroe Doctrine as justification for U.S. involvement. For the next 19 years, Venezuela repeatedly petitioned for U.S. assistance, calling on its neighbor to the north to intervene by either sponsoring arbitration or intervening with force. The United States responded by expressing concern, but did little to facilitate a resolution. In 1895, invoking the Monroe Doctrine, newly appointed U.S. Secretary of State Richard Olnoy sent a strongly worded note to British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary Lord Salisbury, demanding that the British submit the boundary dispute to arbitration. Salisbury's response was that the Monroe Doctrine had no validity as international law. The United States found that the response unacceptable, and in December 1895, President Grover Cleveland asked Congress for authorization to appoint a boundary commission, proposing that the commission's findings be enforced by every means necessary. Congress passed the measure unanimously, and talk of war with Great Britain began to circulate in the U.S. press. Great Britain, under pressure in South Africa with the Boers and managing an empire that spanned the globe, could ill afford another conflict. Lord Salisbury's government submitted the dispute to the American Boundary Commission and said nothing else of the Monroe Doctrine. Venezuela enthusiastically submitted to arbitration, certain that the commission would decide in its favor. However, when the commission finally rendered a decision in October 3, 1899, it directed that the border follow the Schomburgk Line. But it also rejected Great Britain's increasingly extravagant claims. The ruling preserved in the 1835 demarcation. Disappointed, the Venezuelans quietly ratified the commission's findings, but of far greater significance, the Anglo-Venezuelan boundary dispute incident asserted for the first time a more outward-looking American foreign policy, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. Internationally, the incident marked the United States as a world power and gave notice that under the Monroe Doctrine, it would exercise its claimed prerogatives in the Western Hemisphere. Now, since the capture of Maduro, we know that our beloved president likes to put his name on everything, so they've been calling this the Monroe Doctrine. But just like the Monroe Doctrine, it's a revival of American influence in the countries in our hemisphere, in the countries that border us, in the countries that affect us. And not only is it going to benefit the Venezuelans, hopefully, in the long run, and benefit the United States in the long run, but it's also putting our adversaries on notice. Look, none of us want another Iraq or another 21-year Afghanistan. But these are the implications from the way I see it. Number one, the people of Venezuela were suffering under the rule of an illegitimate dictator. That has come to an end. Number two, Although I don't think they were the biggest culprits, they were undoubtedly bringing fentanyl into the country. And that's killing our kids, that's killing our youth, and it's something that we can't allow to continue. Number 3, Maduro's regime illegally confiscated contracts from American oil companies. Okay, so now we're going to be able to go back in, reinstitute the oil companies. We've already seized tankers. We've already agreed to receiving 30 to 50 million barrels a day from Venezuela. That's going to help Venezuela's economy, and it's going to help ours. Number 4, and the biggest one to me, it drastically weakens China and Russia. Without Venezuelan oil, they'll be dependent on European oil, which the U.S. has a vested interest in. And then number 5, the millions of Venezuelans that fled the country under the rule of a dictator will be able to go back home. I see prosperity in Venezuela's future. I see prosperity in America's future. I see America rising to an unprecedented level on the global stage. These are very, very interesting times, and of course, we're going to keep an eye on it. And this is not the last time we're going to talk about this, but I thank you all for listening to me today. I pray blessings over you and your family. I pray God blesses you coming in and you going out. I pray peace, power, and prosperity. And remember that you live in the greatest country on earth, and it's up to you to keep it.
This has been Commission 6-8.
I invite you into the roller coaster ride of my life in the award-winning book, For Such a Time as This, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and How You Can Too. From the very first page, you'll dive into the raw emotions of ambition and resilience, facing one crushing setback after another. Yet, through each trial, I discovered new depths of determination and learned invaluable lessons in negotiation and perseverance. This isn't just a story about overcoming financial hurdles. It's about the profound personal growth that comes from navigating life's toughest challenges. It's about faith, family, and the unwavering belief that setbacks are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. For such a time as this, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and How You Can Too, by award-winning author Randy Millette, available on Amazon. I invite you into the roller coaster ride of my life in the award-winning book, For Such a Time as This, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and How You Can Too. From the very first page, you'll dive into the raw emotions of ambition and resilience, facing one crushing setback after another. Yet, through each trial, I discovered new depths of determination and learned invaluable lessons in negotiation and perseverance. This isn't just a story about overcoming financial hurdles. It's about the profound personal growth that comes from navigating life's toughest challenges. It's about faith, family, and the unwavering belief that setbacks are not the end, but the beginning of something greater. For such a time as this, How I Navigated the World of Multifamily Real Estate to Close My First Deal, and How You Can Too, by award-winning author Randy Millette, available on Amazon.